Hi everybody, Mitch here from the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. And we're back with another weekday reflection on today's Mass readings. Today is Thursday, April 29th. And one thing I'd like to do today, instead of focusing on the gospel or even focusing on the first reading, I'd like to do something new. I'd like to mix it up a little bit. I want to look at today's responsorial psalm. Today's responsorial psalm is a selection of 6 verses from a very important psalm in the Old Testament, and that's Psalm 89. All right, Psalm 89, what do we know about it? Psalm 89 is a royal psalm. It is a psalm that celebrates the covenant of kingship that God made with David. All right, the story of this covenant is actually told in 2 Samuel. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 and following, we have what's called Nathan's oracle, where Nathan comes to David and declares God's intent to establish David himself and all of his heirs as the king over his people Israel, and that he will set descendants upon his throne for all generations, and this will somehow be an everlasting kingdom. It's a remarkable promise that is made to David. In fact, when you think about the Davidic covenant, there's a couple of things that you need to understand how the psalm kind of works. All right, the first thing you need to understand about the Davidic covenant is that, it's the latest and the greatest of all the Old Testament covenants. God began making covenants as early as the time of Adam, and then made one with Noah, and then Abraham, and then Moses. And then we build up to the Davidic covenant. The Davidic covenant is the mountaintop of Old Testament theology, you might say. It's the closest approximation to the New Testament that you will find anywhere in the Old Testament. The arrangements that are set forth in the Davidic covenant bring us right up to the threshold of messianic times, you might say. All right. Now, the second thing you want to know about the Davidic covenant is that it's an unconditional covenant. And that means that God himself swore the oath unilaterally to grant this covenant of kingship to David. And in swearing the oath himself, God takes upon himself the full responsibilities for following through on his word, for actually fulfilling his pledge as we march forward in history. And that's one of the things that Psalm 89 is really celebrating. The fact that God is faithful to his covenants and God has pledged himself to uphold the Davidic line and the Davidic kingdom in days to come is a cause for celebration for God's people, okay? And as we'll discover, it's Psalm 89 and God's fidelity to this covenant that actually forms the basis for messianic hopes in Israel. Because the Messiah, if the Messiah is anything in Old Testament expectation, the Messiah is an heir to the throne of David. So let's read these verses. This is from Psalm 89, and I should say up front that depending on whether or not you're reading, say, the RSV as opposed to the NAB or another translation, sometimes the verses are a little bit different. So I'm reading from the RSV, and today's responsorial psalm comes from Psalm 89, verses 1 and 2 in this translation, 20 and 21, and then 24 and 26. So let's read through these passages and try and fill in some of the holes, find out what's going on. Psalm 89, verse 1. I will sing of your mercies, O Lord, forever. With my mouth I will proclaim your faithfulness to all generations. For your merciful love was established forever. Your faithfulness is firm as the heavens. And then we jump to verse 20. I have found David my servant. With my holy oil I have anointed him, so that my hand shall ever abide with him, and my arm also shall strengthen him. Verse 24, my faithfulness and my mercy shall be with him, and in my name shall his horn be exalted. All right, so he will increase in strength, in other words. And then verse 26, he shall cry to me, you are my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. All right, so what's going on in this responsorial psalm? First thing to note is that the first two verses have a different speaker than verse 20 and following. The first two verses are spoken by the psalmist himself, who's celebrating God's faithfulness. And then the last verses in the responsorial psalm are actually cited by God himself. God is the one who is speaking. So let's first look at the psalmist's words. That's Psalm 89, verses 1 and 2. I will sing of your mercies. I will proclaim your faithfulness. For your merciful love is established forever. Your faithfulness is as firm as the heavens. What is the psalmist doing here? The psalmist is celebrating and extolling two of God's greatest attributes as he reveals himself in the Old Testament. That God is merciful and that God is faithful. So we want to just take a brief moment to see, what does that actually mean? What does it mean when it says that his mercies endure forever and those kinds of things? Well, first, the mercy of God, this is a word that in Hebrew is translated in a multiple different ways in the Old Testament. You can't always tell when this word is there in your translation or not, because it's such a versatile word. It has a surplus of meaning, you might say, so that it can be used in a lot of different contexts. The first thing to note, though, is that the mercy of God is God's chesed. And chesed is one of the most important vocabulary terms in the theological vocabulary of the entire Old Testament. Chesed is something that describes one's committedness to someone or something. All right? So it's often best translated as loyalty or fidelity. And it's very much a covenantal word in Scripture, because covenants create bonds of kinship with people, and those bonds give rise to obligations, so that you're as loyal to someone as you would be to a member of your own family. And that's really what the psalmist is saying, is that God's chesed, his faithfulness, his loyalty, his fidelity, his loving kindness, however it's translated, is that God stands behind his pledge, and he stands behind the people to whom he has made that pledge. He is utterly committed to his people and to the covenants that he makes with them. And that's something to celebrate. And that's what the psalmist is talking about when he talks about God's mercy or his merciful love. But he also celebrates something else. It's God's faithfulness. In Hebrew, that's God's emunah. And what is God's emunah? It is his reliability. It is his trustworthiness. You can invest faith in God and in his covenant pledges because God is constant. He is faithful and reliable. He's always upholding it. So that even when all seems lost, you might say, you can know and have faith that God will come through. Now, we're going to see why that's so important in Psalm 89. That God is eminently loyal. He has the loyalty of a kinsman, and he is as constant and faithful as anyone, and more than anyone. So that's what the psalmist is celebrating. Now, what does the psalmist go on to record about God? What does God actually say? In verse 20, God says, I have found David my servant. With my holy oil I have anointed him. What God is telling us about David and his royal heirs, those who sat on the throne of David after him in the southern kingdom, who were enthroned as kings in Jerusalem for more than 400 years, what we learn about them is that God has anointed them and God has adopted them in a special way. Well, what does that mean? Well, the kings of Israel, we know, were anointed with oil. You might remember the story of Samuel taking a vial of oil and pouring it on Jesse's youngest son, King David. And that pouring of oil upon the recipient was a sign of the Spirit pouring his gifts out upon the new ruler of Israel, equipping that man to be the leader of God's people. All right, so the anointing refers to the rite of coronation, right? When the person is actually made king, they are anointed with oil. And what you discover in Psalm 89 is that God produces something on earth that mirrors what is in heaven. If we were to read through the whole psalm, we would see that the Lord in heaven is exalted above the angels, okay? He is enthroned on high, and he is surrounded by a court of heavenly beings, and God is exalted above them, all right? Then we discover that God has created an image of that heavenly reality down here on earth, where he has taken the Davidic king and exalted the Davidic king and made him higher than the kings of all the earth, so that he is surrounded by a court or a retinue of other kings, and he's been exalted above them, so that there's an image on earth as it is in heaven. And that Davidic king then becomes an image of God's reign over the world, because he's been exalted above the other kings, and he's been anointed. Now, he's also been adopted. That's an important point to make. The last verse of the responsorial psalm is verse 26. He shall cry to me, you are my Father. That's a reference to the Davidic covenant. In Nathan's oracle, in 2 Samuel chapter 7, we are told that he shall be, God says of David and his heirs, I shall be a father to him, and he shall be my son. Right? There's something special about the Davidic king of Israel. He undergoes a royal adoption in a way that is true of no other Israelite. Israel as a people is adopted as the Son of God, the collective Son of God. But over and above that, the king is elevated to be the Son of God in a special way. Now, why is all of this so important? Because if you read Psalm 89 in its entirety, you discover a decisive turning point at verse 38. But now you have cast off and rejected. You are full of wrath against your anointed one, right? That's the Davidic kings. You have renounced the covenant with your servant. You have defiled his crown in the dust. Dropping down to verse 44, you have removed the scepter from his hand and cast his throne to the ground. All of a sudden, the end of the psalm, after all of this celebration of God's loyalty, God's constancy, his faithfulness to his covenants, and the wonderful covenant that he had made with David and his heirs, all of a sudden, the people of Israel are thrown into a crisis of faith, we might say, so that the psalm, which begins as a celebration, as a royal psalm, actually ends as a lament psalm. And what's the issue? What's going on here? What's going on here is that the second part of this psalm is prayed after 586 BC. 586 BC is a decisive date in the history of Israel. That's when the Babylonians invaded the land of Judah for the last time and finally destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. And what's important for our purposes here, the Babylonians dismantled the entire Davidic monarchy. The Davidic monarchy collapsed and disappeared from the stage of history at precisely this time. All right? And so that gives rise to an enormous theological and spiritual struggle in the heart of Israel. Right? It's a struggle between your faith and the facts on the ground. Your faith says he's full of chesed, he's full of emunah, he's full of loyalty and fidelity. And yet, he made this covenant with David, and it appears on the surface like everything has passed away, right? It's all dissolved into dust. David's crown is thrown down to the dust, and the throne has been toppled for good, all right? And so what we discover is that God is asking Israel at this point in history, he's teaching Israel to live by faith, to walk by faith and not by sight. Somehow, some way that is unforeseen by the ancient Israelite, God will still come through on his promises. It's still worth celebrating God's loyalty, God's faithfulness, his constancy, because even though our senses can't detect, we have no way of knowing how God will come through, we are confident that he will. And so Israel grows in its faith. And this actually becomes the basis for reading Psalm 89 in the Jewish tradition as an expectation of the coming Messiah. And you and I actually stand on the other side of fulfillment. We actually stand after the fact where God intervened in history to actually bring about his pledge, to fulfill his pledge to David. He has fulfilled it, even after the eclipse and the disappearance of the Davidic monarchy. And how has he done that? Well, the very first chapter of the New Testament tells us. That's the genealogy of Jesus. The genealogy of Jesus follows the Davidic line from David himself all the way down to Saint Joseph, the legal father of Jesus, who confers upon Jesus the legal title to be the heir to David's throne. Jesus is the Messiah, according to the genealogy of Matthew 1. He's the Messiah precisely because he stands in the royal line of King David. As a matter of fact, if you look at the readings for the solemnity of Saint Joseph, the husband of Mary, it's curious that Psalm 89 is the responsorial psalm for this feast of Saint Joseph. Why? Because he is the one who confers upon Jesus. He's the one who grafts Jesus into the royal Davidic line so that God can fulfill the oath that he swore to David by making Jesus his anointed one, his Messiah, the one through whom David's kingdom will in fact be established forever. I hope this reflection was of some benefit to you. I pray that God blesses you, your family, and your day. And I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Thanks.